Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, welcome to Series 4, Episode 12 of Hashtag Psychotherapy Unfogged. As you know, I'm Mark Fielding, your host and psychotherapist and a relationship counsellor. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Richard Dolan, counsellor and psychotherapist specialising in men's mental health and divorce trauma. Rich is a fully qualified therapeutic counsellor and a registered member of the National Counselling Society, accredited by the Professional Standards Authority. He has over 12 years' experience working in mental health across the NHS, social care, charities, and private care providers, and is passionate about supporting people to live the lives they want. As a therapist, he is trained in humanistic integrative approach, which at the heart is his firm belief in the worth and value of people as individuals. And if it's okay with you, Rich, could I just read something off your website that I loved, really? I mean, I'm just reading a couple of paragraphs off Richie's website. It's no secret men don't talk about their mental health easily. We bottle it up, push it down, put on the mask. The idea of talking to a stranger about feelings and stuff, yeah, whatever, mate, I'm fine, we say. But you're not fine, are you? And also at the end of that page, no fluff, no gimmicks, no cardigans, no crystals, power animals, or white balls of healing light. Just two human beings talking, listening. I mean, I read that, Rich, because I loved it.
Well, I appreciate the feedback, and no disrespect to any therapists out there that do, wear cardigans or use crystals or anything like that in their work. I think it was more about recognizing that there is an appetite out there for therapeutic interventions for men that are not perhaps the way that we might perceive them from some of the stereotypical images of therapists.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I have to say the same thing, obviously, I'm smiling, but no disrespect to, therapists that use kind of alternative means. There's lots and lots of different therapeutic modalities, but I guess you're trying to cut through some of that and just offer, a kind of straight talking approach, if you like, to
Absolutely.
men. Yeah. And I always ask our guests this question to start, and say as much, Rich, or as little as you'd like, but what kind of personal experiences drew you into the field?
Well, I've kind of been around the houses before I became a practicing therapist, and actually started back in 2006. And it was one of those things where, life kind of gets in the way. And as a result of my sort of transition from working in, logistics and, in a kind of a non vocational capacity, I ended up working with various social care providers and kind of, becoming more involved with helping professions. That's not really the right way to say it, but rather than perhaps a service orientated approach, it was more about ultimately helping people to solve problems. I think that was the thing that I always had an aptitude for in my previous roles. But personally, I've always engaged with the world from an emotional perspective. I think when I was younger, and perhaps we'll get onto this in terms of generational sort of perceptions of what a man is. When I was younger, I would definitely have been put into the box of a bit shy, a bit sensitive, a bit emotional. Didn't really kind of fit in that kind of running around playing football, muddy knees type of this is what boys do. So I always harbored a kind of an emotional awareness of what was happening around me, and became perhaps that person that friends might confide in more than others, and would be trusted to kind of give a level-headed response to a situation. So I think it was always a kind of a natural, intuitive part. But increasingly, I found myself thinking, I want to do something that has kind of worth, has meaning, has value, and making someone else rich. Sitting on the end of a phone or being in an office doing something that is soul-crushingly boring, with the sole purpose being that it really puts money in someone else's pocket, didn't seem to be the best use of my my time. So through various kind of avenues, I arrived at a point where I realized that this is going to sound really cheesy, so I apologize in advance, and it's a bit of a cliche, but I realized that this is what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
There are other things that I would like to do, other things I'd like to be better at, that I'm sure would bring me in more money. But ultimately, this is where I could be the best version of myself and you know, the value from that is helping other people to find a way to a better place.
Yeah, and it's a true. I mean, I think this is probably true for most people in the field. I mean, it's a real vocation, isn't it? And from what you're saying, I guess some of the personality strengths, bit logistics and being able to solve problems, but also your high level of sensitivity. And I'm reading, high capacity for empathy and high emotional intelligence. I mean, all of that kind of feeds into a profession where you're going to help others, which you're also driving a lot of meaning from.
Absolutely. I think you either are that type of person or you aren't. And I think, that's why a lot of those, again, I use the term helping professions, are rife with exploitation. They're playing on the goodwill of a lot of people that want to do something good and want to help for the right reasons. And there are people, as there are in all professions, that are perhaps in there for their own reasons. But yeah, it felt like, well, it feels like, looking back, that this was always where I was going to end up at some point.
And just to stay, and again, just say as much or as little as you're happy with, but just to stay with your personal history, just for one more question, what was it like growing up as a sensitive child? I mean, as a sensitive man, I guess that's probably better put. I mean, what was it like growing up with, as a man with, high sensitivity?
Well, it was definitely hard, and to add to my previous answer in terms of personal experience, my parents divorced when I was 11, so that was a significant point in my life that there was a sort of a divergence from how things perhaps might have been to how they played out. Whether this was a kind of a coincidence or a predetermined sort of pattern of behavior, I also have been through a divorce in my life as well. So when I set out my stall as a therapist, I always felt that, through my own observations and certainly through training, that men's mental health was massively underrepresented.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into the stats around, how many female therapists there are in comparison to men and so on and so forth. But I think it's pretty widely accepted that there are more female therapists,
for sure.
and that the stats that we have do show that perhaps women are more inclined to access therapy or to work with an emotional intervention than a man would be, or a male would be.
Yeah.
So I always felt that there was a place where I could be more effective than perhaps others, And one of the things I looked at from the very beginning was to understand, who are my customers, who are my clients, and not to try and be all things to all clients, but rather to look at, where am I able to work most effectively. So I always had an inkling that my personal experiences of being being a man and divorced, both from my own direct experience and that of my parents, would certainly allow me to offer a relatable approach to an entire generation, or a couple of generations, really. If you look at kind of divorce rates and how things have played out and where we are now, I felt, okay, well, that's perhaps a rather underserved section of the therapeutic customer base, if you want to talk about it in business terms.
Yeah, and we'll definitely come to divorce trauma in a minute. I mean, I'm just thinking about, we did an episode a couple of episodes ago with Ray Bonney, who lives in Australia, and he's quite a big name in men's health generally. And she was saying that in Australia, and I think this is probably also true in the UK, support services are not really there for men in terms of emotional support as they are for women. I mean, there's probably complex reasons for that, but men experiencing things like divorce, like stillbirth, like miscarriage, not really the support services there for them.
No.
So I think offering that support, as a male therapist, I think is really, really important. I mean, just moving into divorce trauma, I mean, for our listeners, could you say a little bit around what that is, what that looks like, and maybe draw men into it?
Well, it's I guess it's a term that I began using. I think the word trauma has been certainly, post pandemic, has been applied to a lot of things. We're hearing a lot of things being described as something trauma nowadays. And if we look at what trauma actually is, it's a disruption of some kind. It doesn't have to be that huge cataclysmic event. It can be some kind of deviation that leaves a mark, some kind of interaction, some kind of experience whereby somebody's usual perception of something has been disrupted in some way. So if we look at what divorce is, it's the breaking of a union if we're looking at it in a kind of a marriage sense, it's a contract that's been broken, usually because one or both parties haven't adhered to what that contract has asked of it. So we've got quite a disruptive break there. There's also the more emotional side, the safety that comes with being in a relationship, the vulnerability and all of that sort of thing. And if we extend that out to the family unit, it's a disruption, the impact on the children. We've got these ripples, these massive ripples of trauma that will spread outwards from that single point of two people parting ways. So it's everything that comes with it, really. And then that, as children, certainly in my experience, will to some degree inform our own perspective of what a healthy relationship does or doesn't look like. Trust issues, abandonment issues, all of these kind of things. So I would say that a lot of people probably come to therapy for issues which perhaps relate to divorce or the breakdown of a relationship, but perhaps that's not what they're aware of. But if we unpick it and we look back and we think, okay, well, that was quite a significant event that took place, so we can sort of trace back these fracture points to then. That's a bit of a rambling answer, but
no, but I'm fully. I mean, it's a complex subject, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, I totally obviously agree with you. I mean, a divorce, for anyone within the family system and the extended family system, and possibly even the friend system, I mean, it ripples out. I mean, I really agree with that, and the trauma ripples out, and it continues, doesn't it? And I mean, just bringing men into it, and I guess we're going to perhaps generalize a little bit, in talking about men's mental health, because I have to say we're all individuals, and I mean, things like internalizing. I mean, men do that a lot, but women also internalize, don't they? But generally, what would you say? How do men cope with divorce trauma? I mean, what would you say men's kind of favorite go-to coping strategies tend to be?
I think, again, it depends where we're looking at generationally. If we take myself, for example, so I'm 46, so I grew up so if you think about when my dad was around, if he hears this, I don't want it to sound like he just disappeared off the face of the earth. But in all honesty, he may as well have done for what it felt like to that 12-year-old version of myself. So at a time when I'm looking around for male role models and guidance on how to process my own things. I had a younger brother, so the message I had was, right, you're the man of the house now, so you need to look after your brother, which as a 12-year-old kind of comes through as, right, well, what you think and feel isn't important now. You've got to put that to one side. So you're receiving that instruction, you're thinking, well, I don't really know how to do that because I'm a child, but also I feel this way too. So you're looking around for, okay, well, what are strong male role models? For me at that time, it would have been people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, the traditional kind of stoic, grin and bear it, you don't complain. You look at all of those kind of those sort of movies, those where it starts out and it's got the cop that's kind of relentlessly hunting the killer. And let's have a little look at their situation. Quite often, they're living alone. They've got a kind of a marriage that's fractured. The film will start off and you'll see pictures of kids on a mantelpiece. There'll be messages on an answer phone suggesting that bills are about to be cut off. There's a fridge full of half-eaten Chinese. All these things are saying, okay, men can't take care of themselves.
It's so true.
And what you've got to do is just kind of suck it up, and this is what society expects you to do. So I think when we look at the generational response to that, that kind of divorce trauma, is that they kind of just internalize it, as you say, or they avoid it, or they perhaps engage in behaviors designed to sort of suppress that. Very few of them, I think, will deal with it in a healthy way or process it, because here's the thing, they've never been shown how to. We've got a generation or two of men now that are being asked or being expected to know how to deal with their emotions in a healthy, functional way, having previously been shown absolutely the opposite of that. And they're also now being blamed, I think, for not being able to talk about things in a healthy way. There's no kind of like accountability from a societal perspective of, well, we've really done the dirty on men for a while now. We want them to be different all of a sudden, but where's the guidance? Where's the learning? And we've got a generation of sort of 30 to 40-year-olds that well, my dad used to just do this. My dad never really talked much, but he's not the sort of bloke that you have a chat with. That's the sort of thing I hear a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think they do deal with it, is the answer, really, Mark.
Yeah, and like you say, I mean, I guess for it is partly generational, but I mean, partly it's probably also true today as well. But there aren't really the role models, of men dealing with, emotional things, trauma, in a really, really kind of, connected emotional way. I mean, I guess some of the implicit messaging and also some of the explicit messaging is suck it up, just get on with it, and it's so I'd never really thought about what you said around the TV shows with Bruce Willis, and it is true. They all start off with, somebody who's, struggling to live a normal life, probably divorced, separated from their family, and then they go on to be the hero, the
Yeah.
strong person, and that's such strong messaging,
But
isn't it,
how do they
really?
do that? They don't do it by
No,
sitting down and having a conversation and acknowledging their vulnerabilities or asking for help. They do
no,
it by steamrolling through an army of bad guys, blowing stuff up, and
yeah,
ultimately proving their worth and value. And then,
mm,
the estranged wife will turn up at the end and the kid will be there, Daddy, I love you. And everything's kind of back to normal. And they've achieved
yeah,
that through this kind of stoic,
yeah.
not giving in, giving up type approach, which doesn't it doesn't bear fruit in the real world. It's make believe.
And in the therapy room, I
Hmm.
mean, and this again, obviously because you have to be careful how you answer this, but does it take a while sometimes with the kind of men we're describing, with living in the socially constructed society we're describing? Men come to therapy, but does it take a while for them to come? I mean, men presenting in therapy with trauma or with, any host of things, will they leave it quite late? They'll be desperate, maybe suicidal ideation before they actually seek help, or is that not your experience? I mean, I guess it depends on the individual, of course, but
Yeah, I'd say more
yeah,
often than not, people get in touch when the crisis is happening, rather than and how many people kind of think, oh, I better make an appointment with a therapist because I think in 3 months I'm going to have a tough time. It doesn't tend to work like that, but I think
yeah,
men will quite often. So I get a lot of inquiries from wives and girlfriends on behalf
okay,
of the partner who perhaps in conversation has finally relented or agreed to
yeah,
get help. And my answer is always the same. That's great, but they've got to be the one to get in touch with me.
yeah,
Um, I get a lot of people who do get in touch who say, well, my wife or my girlfriend wants me to do this. So again, my first point would be to explore, why, who are you here for, really? And more
yeah,
often than not, it is themselves,
yeah,
but they need a reason or a kind of an enabler almost. But what I would say is that the way I try and present myself, and some of it you kind of touched on when you read from my website there, is I wanted to give people as much opportunity to reject me
mm,
before they chose to work with me, because when they make that call, they've already kind of decided, yeah, this person sounds like someone I might want to work with. So I thought, well, I'll be honest, I'm not going to fill my website with reams and reams of information that I don't think the people that I can best help actually want to read. And if we think about the male approach, when we take our car to the garage, what do we really want to know? We want to know how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, and when they can do it.
yeah,
You know, so I give what I believe are my target kind of demographic, if you like, the information they need to decide, do I want to take this to the next step? And when we've had that call initially, everything I've read, everything I've written, sorry, everything they've read up to that point is redundant, because it's about then, okay, is this relationship going to work?
yeah,
And that is when perhaps my experience of, you know, being a man, being, challenged around expressing myself emotionally and
yeah,
understanding what that's like, and also certain themes. A lot of dad stuff is in there, so I'll ask a few
yeah,
questions initially during the consultation, and just that initial validation perhaps of the fact that what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what they're going through,
yeah,
their response to it is okay. It kind of really accelerates that therapeutic bond. And then
yeah,
if we can get a session in, then usually we can get into it fairly quickly and they're ready to go, because I think they, as you were asking, they come at a point of need, and more of them, so many of them have a higher need, I think, than they realize. And it's when
yeah.
that connection's
Great.
made, the floodgates tend to open a bit.
Yeah. So I guess in the initial sessions, really, I guess you're just allowing them to feel safe enough to open up, really. And I guess the way you work, and yeah, and I guess in some respects, your maleness, and the male identity maybe just helps a male who perhaps has been taught not to open up. It's an
Yes,
encouragement, and you're kind of modeling it as well, aren't you, just by what you do, I guess.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
I've had this said to me by numerous clients. You don't look like a therapist, and the question that then comes to mind is, well, what does a therapist look like? And that's where I kind of played around with that in terms of cardigans. But what
Yeah.
I've heard from several people is you look like someone I could have a beer with. Now, I know that's not necessarily the way you want to advertise yourself as a therapist, but I think for a lot of guys, what that means is
Yeah.
he looks safe. He
Yeah.
looks relatable. He looks like somebody that I can sit down with and let my guard down a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're looking for first and foremost.
Yeah.
So yeah, the relationship is in most forms of therapy is key. But I think them being able to express themselves to somebody that they feel might get them, or that they can see an element of themselves in, then
Yeah.
a few reflections from myself, or whatever, and we're well on our way to
Yeah.
to kind of unpicking it. Another thing is you talked there about feeling more comfortable. When we're talking about divorce, there is usually some kind of infidelity
Yeah.
involved. Where that is on the part of the man, I think a lot of them are very reluctant to work with a female therapist because they perceive that they would be judged. If they have committed adultery or been unfaithful, or are the kind of the antagonist in the relationship, then they're perhaps avoidant of that. So maybe they come to a male therapist because they hope that they'll be given a bit of a fairer crack at the whip. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that happens in couples work as well. I think, yeah. I mean, I'm moving around a little bit, but in terms of all the social construction around male identity and how males should or shouldn't emote, I mean, do you think in your experience that because of that, men can hold a lot of shame, really? Because the way men are meant to be in society is very, very rigid. I mean, just to take a few things that just literally coming into my mind now, things like, I don't know, men always being available for sex, men always having a high libido, men, being able to suck up their emotions and just get on, men always being resilient, men not being sensitive. All these things are so rigid, that they're so created by society as a way for men to be in the world. I just wonder whether a lot of men that come to you have a lot of shame when they're not, identifying with, what society wants them to be.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm sure shame is is a great leveler. It will it will take you down, and it doesn't discriminate.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of areas there that you've mentioned that men would feel shame about, and it touches upon something that I think is more prevalent now than it ever has been. And this may be slightly controversial, but what I think we've got here is a problem in that it's a hard time right now to be a man. That statement in itself would see me the target of many people that would say, but wait a minute, hold on a second, men have had it easy for so long. And that's not the point. It's not about who's had it easy for the longest. I think the issue is that all of a sudden society has decided that they want men to be something different than they have, since society and kind of social programming sort of became a thing.
Sure.
The narrative at the moment is that ultimately men are the bad guys. There's always got to be a bad guy. There's always a massive drama triangle that's playing out. So the narrative is that men are the bad guys. And we've got the really kind of, potent mix of, gender ideologies that are going on at the moment. Feminism was the main movement, and that's obviously come under a tremendous amount of fire recently with the emergence of the trans rights movement. And everything is an incredibly, volatile battleground at the moment where people are really taking it to extreme places. But ultimately, I think the agreed upon narrative is, okay, men are bad. Boys need to be told. Boys need to be shown how to be better men, and we need to stand up and be allies and all that.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that it means that if men are the villain, they can't be the victim. We can't be sympathetic towards men because that undermines that narrative. So we're kind of caught in this, this strange no man's land, where we've got the figures to say that we know that men are taking their own lives in huge numbers for
Yes,
reasons that we
so
don't
true.
really know why.
Yeah.
That's, I'm not making that up.
No,
Okay,
no, no, that's
this is a
true.
thing
Yeah,
that's happening.
yeah,
And the solution to that is that we've got to encourage men to talk more. We've got to destigmatize it. And we've got to say it's okay. So then you get campaigns. I saw this the other day. I think it was Mind actually, and they've got a lot of flack over this online because they tweeted something like, "A real man talks about his feelings." And then you've got a lot of people saying, well, hold on a second. By using that language, what you're suggesting then is that if you don't talk about your feelings, you're not a real man. And
yeah,
you see the trouble you get into with this
yeah,
kind of like a real man type thing.
yeah, yeah,
But if men are the bad guys, then we can't be sympathetic towards them because that means they can't be the bad guys because the villain can't be sympathetic. So we're going to put the responsibility on them. We're going to say, you've got to talk more. You've got to open up. You've got to, but then there's nothing there for them. What they get is go and join a men's shed group or go and do it's the same as saying to, 10, 15 years ago, saying to a bunch of women, why don't you just have a Tupperware night? That will cheer you up. Get together with your friends, have a Tupperware. It's insulting, if I'm honest, what happens with men's mental health, because it all gets lumped into that kind of, just get them together in a shed or a garage or take them down the pub, play pool. It's okay. What they don't actually, when I say they, I mean society, they don't want to hear what the men have to say, which is, we don't know what you want from us. We don't know how to be. I thought that, I grew up thinking that this is what I was meant to do and I've done it. And now you're telling me that's wrong. What do I do? Show me how to do it. They don't want to hear the confusion. They don't want to go, actually, yeah, there is a piece of work that needs to be done in between here. And to do that, we've got to stop demonizing men, or anybody. And then, they're left with this kind of, well, where do I go? What do I do? Where do I fit in? Because again, generationally, those male stereotypes don't really exist anymore. Men used to work in the factory, women used to tend a home, men used to process their emotions through physical labor, through social clubs, through those very defined social roles which are being eroded, for better or worse. It's something that's happening, and all things change. But whilst women or females, or the female role model, is being expanded and empowered, men are not having that same level of investment societally. So again, I'm kind of rambling a little bit there, but I've seen this time and time again, and I think that men don't know how to be men, because other than keeping them in the villain box at the moment, no one's really decided what men should be.
Yeah. And then there's so much mixed messaging around it. I mean, some of the messaging is, be a man in the old kind of traditional way. And some of the messaging, like you say, is, a real man, just using what you said, the Mind put out, someone that opens up their emotions and their feelings. So, so which is it? And I guess, as you said kind of at the start of the show, really, men that have grown up in generations where the male role model has been somebody who went out to work and didn't express their emotions, and to expect them to be able to change those generational patterns and personal history patterns, just on a whim. I mean, that's an impossible ask, isn't it? I mean, how are men meant to do that?
Absolutely, and it is, in the grand scheme of things, on a whim. This has taken place over a period of years, but if we look at the time span,
it's tiny, really, in comparison.
It's almost instant. It's like, right, be somebody different. And men are scared. Men are scared of saying anything. They're scared of doing anything. And listen, I'm a parent. I have two daughters. Okay, so yes, I'm absolutely 100% hot on anything. They're 12 and 8, or soon to be 8, and I'm super hot on anything around their safety. Okay, and I'm conscious that they're going to be entering the world in a way which means that I can't be with them all the time, and I give them the best guidance and advice I can. I teach them self-respect, and I hope that they will kind of lean on that when they need to make those decisions and judgments themselves. Am I scared about their vulnerability out there? Of course I am, but I also respect their judgment and their ability to make choices for themselves. What I'm not doing is telling them how to sort of manipulate a man to get what they want. I'm not kind of encouraging them to see men as lesser or as a bad thing. but to just understand, the perhaps the subtleties, the differences in, how those traditionally male and female perspectives, which come from our generationally conditioned
for
experiences,
sure. Yeah.
lead us to, to kind of navigate the world. And that's going to both bring us together and bring us in conflict with members of the opposite sex. So, it's a really difficult line to tread, because I am not, I wouldn't even describe myself as a men's mental health advocate or, supporter. I'm a man. I'm a therapist, and the area that both my experience and the natural kind of flow of clients has come from is around men's mental health and the impact of divorce. When I first started, when I talked about offering or specializing in that, I was by several female therapists. I was kind of, I wouldn't say attacked, but they were definitely not entirely happy with the idea that I would be excluding women in some way. And I said, well, I wouldn't at all. As it also said on my website, I work with anybody that's brave enough to reach out for help. But to say that you're specializing in men's mental health seems to be a far more, heinous crime than to say that you work with, women's issues, or the multitude of therapists out there that openly, quite rightly, specialize in working with women and female related mental health issues. But nobody ever says, well, hold on, what about the men? Because you can't be sympathetic towards the men. And that's where it comes back to this, this issue that we have of, them kind of falling down the cracks.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the lack of support. And even I think, in relationships, I mean, this is maybe something that I hear, even in relationships, I think it can be confusing for men, because in some relationships, the messaging will be, or in the heterosexual relationship, messaging will be sometimes from the woman, I need you to be strong, I need you to be someone that can support me, someone that I can lean on, but then there can also be messaging, I need you to be a lot more open. I need you to cry in front of me. And even within a relationship dynamic, I think for some men, I think that's really confusing. What are they meant to be? I mean, of course, there is a combination of being both, but the messaging's so mixed, isn't it? I think even for men in relationships, and of course their identification is their fathers and, et cetera, generation. It's so confusing for them. What do they do? What are they meant to be? They just don't know, do they? And so effectively they end up being none of the above. They just don't know, really.
No, you're right. And that confusion in itself can breed that kind of depression and that despondency. And, they're kind of looking to themselves to think, well, am I my dad a lot of the time, and on that note, I do actually find myself working quite often with women who have sought me out either on the recommendation of somebody else or because they actively want to have a male therapist, and it's usually in relation to absent father issues as well.
Okay.
So what I've noticed is in a lot of the women that I've worked with, where that relationship with that father has been a central kind of factor in in what we've talked about, you can see those generational issues playing out in there. If they were emotionally unavailable to the mother or to the daughter as well, then that's going to influence, well, in my experience, it has often influenced the choices of partner, which then kind of, they maintain that thing. So they'll go for somebody who's emotionally unavailable because what they're perhaps wanting is, because that's been their model. So they're looking for that validation, that love perhaps they didn't receive from the father. And that just perpetuates that kind of cycle even further, that is about men not knowing how to access that part of themselves. But you made a really good point there, Mark, in that, within a relationship, we can have these kind of stereotypes kind of play out to various extremes, and the partner might want the man to be the strong stoic type and to kind of do the manly things, do the sawing and the chopping and the lifting and all that sort of stuff, and and to be protective. But then on the flip of a coin, they might want them to be talking about their emotions and expressing themselves in a love language, which is a term I've heard used an awful lot, that they've got absolutely no idea how to do. And then all of a sudden they're failing in some way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think men often feel they're failing in relationships because that they just can't seem to get it, to get it right.
Mm.
And then of course I'm just moving. I know we're kind of moving to the end, but even in terms of things like DV, like domestic violence, I'm talking to a dog walker in the park the other day, and they told me that men absolutely can't be the victim of domestic violence. How can a man be that? I mean, these kind of stereotypes and these kind of ideas are still so around in society. I mean, it's surprising, isn't it, that really that some of them have not broken down.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to maybe just ask you. I ask all our guests this, so the end of the interview. What kind of strategies do you use in order to sustain your good mental health? I mean, are there things you do kind of on a daily basis to keep your mental health steady?
Yeah. So for me, exercise is definitely the main one. I've got a gym in my garden. I don't like the whole kind of public gym thing. I've just kind of worked out on my own for ages, and I find that is a kind of a place of solitude. I can just put my music on, and there's a structure to it. 'Cause I'm going through my routine, and whether you want to kind of push it or not, there's a way to chart progression. So it's a thing that I can invest myself into where it's purely about me. It doesn't depend on any kind of external factors. So that's definitely something. But where I tend to find myself being kind of emotionally and mentally replenished, I suppose, would be through mountain biking, which is again, it's a physical hobby, but because of the nature of this job, you don't tend to work the 9 to 5, so I've got the freedom to when the weather's good, to go and ride at certain places. I've actually just come back from a race in the Alps called the Mega Avalanche, which is pretty crazy. You've got 350 odd people starting at the top of a 3,000 meter glacier and all kind of trying to get to the bottom of a 27-kilometer course at once. So you could argue that that is not exactly a sign of good mental health, putting yourself through that. But I think it's important to have something that is completely ring fenced from this type of work or whatever it is that you do, and that can be. It doesn't have to be extreme mountain biking. It can be doing a jigsaw. It can be, watching a series, reading a book, going for a walk, but something that you identify as protected time. I think, if you can get some kind of movement in there and get some kind of sunlight in there as well, you're only going to have the benefits of that. So that's my strategy, protecting that. And at times I have to be a bit selfish, but I know that if I don't, the consequence on, my mental health, those around me, my ability to be the best therapist I can will be impacted.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And also, if people want to get hold of you, they want to go into therapy with you. How do they do it? How do you work? Do you work online?
Yeah, I predominantly work online now, which is really just a response again to the clients that I have. I do offer face-to-face sessions.
Yeah.
I work in Christchurch in the UK, based in Bournemouth. So online is probably the way that I can offer the most flexibility. Check my website out, checkyourhead.co.uk, or email me direct at richard@checkyourhead.co.uk. And the way that I work is I'll have an initial 15-minute consultation call, which is an opportunity for me to understand a bit more about how I might be able to help, but more importantly for the client to get a sense of how they might feel working for me. And what I would hope is that from that initial contact, any interaction we have, it would be a consistent experience. I don't know how I've come across today, but this is probably how you'd find me in the therapy session: quite conversational, quite relatable, quite down to earth. And depending on what that consultation call brings up, we can either get something booked in, or if there's perhaps someone better suited to meet the need, I'd refer on, or give some options there really. But yeah, just get in touch on the website if it's something you feel like you'd like to explore further.
Great, and Rich, we'll put all of your links on our social network sites. So if anyone wants to get in touch, they can listen to the podcast. They can find the links on our social platforms. And just before we finish, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to say, or you'd like to touch on?
I mean, this topic, men's mental health, it's so broad. I think it's difficult to cover it all in this sort of time span.
Yeah,
I think it's important to note that there is some really good work being done out there. There's some really good initiatives, and there are a lot of men who will see an improvement in their mental health from group activities, from that social and community thing. I'm not taking anything away from that. I just think that it can't be the only solution that we offer. And I think that as with anything that gains focus, there are perhaps some snake oil salesmen out there that, you know, I see a lot of retreats and, you know, kind of things that are talking about getting in touch with your inner, you know, your inner sort of sense of masculinity and all that. And again, they may help some people, but I think that the starting point is all about, you know, your relationship with yourself, and therapy with a therapist that you feel comfortable to, you know, begin exploring that with, I think is always going to be more of a beneficial and, you know, a value for money approach than maybe signing up to some kind of 8-week course or you know, a men's retreat or something like that, because it's what's going on inside that is driving everything, really. So I realized I kind of went off at a tangent there, but I'd say men's mental health ultimately is no different to anybody else's mental health. It's all about that relationship with yourself. So if you're feeling that you're struggling, speak to somebody, start that journey. And if you're, you know, if you're lucky enough to be in the right hands, if it's not their hands, they'll certainly pass you on to someone else's.
And I completely agree with what you said. And there's no shame in not being okay. You know, I mean, it's okay to not be okay, and yet it's also okay to reach out and ask for help. And there is something, just like you say, Rich, about the therapeutic space, which can be in itself so healing. You know, if you find the right therapist, someone that you feel safe with, someone that you feel you can open up with, I mean, that in itself can be transformative. So I just want to thank you, Rich. It is a massive subject, but thank you so much for coming on. It's going to be a really interesting show for our listeners.
No, I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, and once again, I'd like to thank Rich very much for coming on. Men's mental health and men's health we've covered a couple of times in season 4, and we've covered it a few times in our previous seasons under our branding hashtag Never Alone. It is an important subject, but it is a very, very wide subject. And I guess at the end of the interview, you know, as often happens, you know, I looked at my list of questions and I felt we could have spent probably another 2 or 3 hours really talking about it. And things that I could have asked were, you know, men and addictions. I mean, how men who have a coping strategy of internalizing, how do they cope with things? Often men can turn to addictions. Wanted to talk about men and social groups and perhaps how they differ from female social groups. And I know these are generalizations and we have to be aware of that, but it's interesting. I think, you know, my experience of men in social groups really is, and we'll talk about sport and they'll, you know, maybe joke with each other, but you know, talk about difficult things like, you know, divorce, health. Those conversations, and certainly in my generation with male groups, are quite difficult to come by, really, which leaves men all the more isolated. And something that Ray Bonnie was saying a couple of episodes ago, that in Australia, and I think the same is probably true in the UK, that there aren't really the support services for men, you know, in terms of things like postnatal depression, stillbirth, miscarriage. Men don't really have the support structures there, you know, from society to be able to lean in and get help. Yeah, there is always private therapy, but I guess that the lack of support services and conversations around support for men suffering from these kind of traumas, coupled with the historical coping strategy that men have of internalizing their emotion, the two things I think are particularly toxic, really. One reinforces the other. Really interesting what Rich was saying around male stereotypes and what he was saying about men in movies. I'd never really thought about that, but it's so true what he said. The heroes, kind of Bruce Willis type hero, are often portrayed at the start of a movie as divorced, separated, picture of their family on the sideboard, empty fridge, maybe a load of beer in it, and, you know, Chinese from 3 weeks ago. And what is that message? Well, what message does that send? And then they go off and they become really violent, and, you know, they'll blow things up and shoot people, and then they'll come back and they'll be celebrated. That's the kind of messaging that I think is very, very negative for men in so many different ways. And things are changing. I think with the Generation Z and younger generations, I think there are more conversations around mental health, but some of this implicit messaging around maleness, there is a lot to go. There is a lot of change that I think needs to be made. Things like, I work a lot with highly sensitive people, highly sensitive men, 20% of the population. There's a lot of shame around men who are sensitive in Western culture. There's a lot of shame around it because I guess men societally are not meant to be sensitive. They're not meant to be particularly in touch with emotions. They're meant to be strong. They're meant to be resilient. I think that is different in other cultures where perhaps sensitivity in males, females is more celebrated. But certainly I think in Western society to grow up as a highly sensitive male, I think is very, very challenging. I think it's challenging to grow up as a highly sensitive woman as well in this current society. But I think for man, it can be very, very shame inducing. And some of the mixed messaging, coming from, family systems, coming from generational systems, coming from society, I think is still very, very dominant. Ideas of maleness, I think, are still very, very strong, although, however, slightly breaking down. And also divorce trauma. Rich, working in divorce trauma, what an important place to work, supporting men through what is, for everyone involved, for the whole family system, for the extended family system, for friends, traumatic. Divorce is very, very traumatic. So working with men, perhaps who would tend to shut their feelings away, internalize and move forwards with all of this depressed, I think offers a service to men, but to deal with that trauma in a therapeutic way rather than feeling as though they're tucking it away. But of course, these things are never tucked away. They're alive inside us. They activate us. They inform our behaviour in the future. So what an important field, really. So once again, if you want to get in touch with Rich, check out our social media platforms. Rich's links will also be with this podcast. We've got another episode for you coming on Friday. I'll be interviewing Carlos Vasquez from California. Really, really interesting guy with an interesting story. I'm not going to do any spoilers, but please tune in. I'm really excited about that one. It's going to be a really, really great show. And once again, thank you to our listeners for listening. Be good to each other, be good to yourselves, be good to the planet. And I'll see you on Friday.